This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. We try and make sure we're daily bringing you interesting business and private equity episodes, as well as brilliant and interesting guests in the private equity or business world or other worlds. Today, we're thrilled to be with somebody who's an ultra marathoner, who's created a TV show, who is host a docu-series, who's a chief marketing officer, fractional chief marketing officer. We're visiting today with Peter Murphy Lewis, who just is absolutely fascinating and brilliant. You'll get to learn a lot more about him today. Peter, can you take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and some of the things you do?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'd start off by saying I'm married to a fantastic woman from South America, dad of an 8-year-old. We do live inside of a zoo. Wichita, Kansas is probably the most interesting thing about me. On a professional level, I wear a lot of hats. Some of them you alluded to, documentaries, TV host, political commentary. But what pays the bills is, I'm a fractional chief marketing officer. I spend about 6 to 9 months out of the year in Wichita, Kansas, where I live next to my parents, and they come over for dinner about 7 days a week and take my son to school every morning. And the rest of the time I spend it where my in-laws live in South America, Santiago, Chile, where I resided for 15 years.
You're phenomenal. And tell us what you're most focused on and excited about today. Where are you most focused and excited today?
It's definitely the docu-series in long-term care, people worth caring about. We just launched the first docu-series in Nebraska in October with big success, with a lot of press coverage. The feedback has been astounding. I've been remarkable. The chair of ACA told me that it's the most real thing that he's seen, the most authentic thing that he's seen in our industry. And, I've had 10 calls with 10 other states to film a 2.0 version in 2025. And I hope to do it in a camper with my 8-year-old son and bring along my 71-year-old father to help me do this.
And talk a little bit about the docu-series, how you got started on it, and what are some of these you're seeing and you're learning in doing so?
The docu-series started off as a conversation with the board chair of the foundation from Nebraska Healthcare Association. There may have been a beer involved, Scott. And I said, you know what? I've been doing TV shows in South America for almost 6 years where I get to show people on TV about other people's passion. So it's kind of a mix of Mike Rowe's job on Dirty Jobs with Anthony Bourdain and No Reservations. That's kind of what I've been doing in South America for quite some time. And I said to Nebraska, I said, why don't we do this about caregivers? I am indebted to the caregivers who took care of my grandparents. Why don't we do something about them instead of something about America's seniors? And that will be a way that we can control the narrative. And that beer turned into a documentary that turned into a launch of a premiere, and now it's turned into a couple more versions of it next year.
Fantastic. When we talk about the caregivers in long-term care, we've got this tremendous shortage. I constantly hear of nursing homes, long-term care providers, facilities, because of the nursing shortage, because of the caregivers, not enough of them, and reimbursement getting challenged in certain places. So then hospitals are other places to discharge patients to. What are you seeing overall? What are some of the lessons you're learning in watching the space?
Yeah, so I think what's unique about working with Nebraska in this instance is that they were already, thinking ahead of the curve of how do we address the staffing shortage at a younger age. So they have an aggressive, progressive program where they teach middle schoolers and high schoolers that they can build a career in long-term care or healthcare, acute care, whatever. And when they came to saying, how can we have the biggest impact? I said, well, why don't we, do a version of, TikTok or Humans of New York or Dirty Jobs and show the people that love healthcare instead of, as a marketer, I always say, show, don't tell. Well, we often in long-term care, not only do we tell people what we're great at instead of showing it. Often we don't control that narrative, and it's the national press who's saying something negative about us. So the best way to control that narrative was to talk about people who want to work there and why they don't leave for a better paying job in another industry. And, in the documentary, that we had 17-year-olds who were CNAs talking about that they want to spend their life in this. And we had 70-year-olds who tried to retire twice and they can't because this is their family away from home.
And talk a little bit about your son and your father having some exposure to this. Any lessons from that chance to visit with them and talk about this? And you say you live in a zoo. I don't know if you meant that truly or metaphorically, but talk about that too, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I mean, the rip effect for me is seeing my father eyes when he watched the docu-series for the first time, seeing my son watch it for the first time, right? Like the majority of my TV show is in Spanish, so my dad doesn't watch it. He's from Kansas and doesn't speak Spanish. The majority of the TV show, my son hasn't watched it because he's 8 and we don't let him watch a lot of TV. But when they were in the room of a sold-out theater in Lincoln, Nebraska with 300 people crying and thankful and feeling like this had represented an authentic way of what they've dedicated their entire lives to, and getting the feedback from, 2 of the 5 most important people in my life, my son and my dad, that's the ripple effect that has an impact on me. And to the fact of living in a zoo, that's true. So I literally live inside of a zoo. There are zebras that are about 30 yards behind right where I'm sitting as I speak to you today, Scott. And there are cheetahs that are about 60 yards in front of me where I speak to you. And this is a cool opportunity that I got when I was traveling the country back in 2019. I visited this zoo with my 3-year-old at the time, and we spent a month-long trip together. And the owner of the zoo reached out to me about a month later and said, "Hey, Peter, you're a fractional chief marketing officer. Can you come take over our marketing department for 6 months?" And I said, "I live in South America. I don't have a car. I don't have a house. I don't live in the United States." And he said, "I'll give you a house, but you might not like it because it's you'll be eating where you work. It's a house outside the zoo." And I said, "Hold on." Called my wife. She was in Santiago, Chile. And I said, "Do you want to live close to the zebras?" And she said, "Take the job." And she flew to the US about 10 days later, and we moved into the zoo, and we've been here for 5 years.
Yeah, you see, now that's absolutely amazing, and I absolutely love that. Uh, Talk about, you mentioned 2 of the most important people in your life, and you said that there's 3 others. Now, can you name those 3 others? Am I going to cause you trouble by leaving somebody out? You seem to be very clear on that number 5. Can you get me the other 3?
Yeah, I can't rank them, but it would be, my wife and my mom and my brother.
And how are you enjoying? Had you lived in the States previously, or tell us about your background just a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, the fast version of connecting the dots as a storyteller of how I got back to Kansas is at the age of 14, growing up in a small town in Kansas, my parents sent me to a really cool boarding high school in Missouri, where out of the 160 students in Missouri of this boarding high school, about 60 of them are international. And that's where I got my international bug, where I wanted to learn another language, where I started to realize, people from Egypt, Japan, and Mexico thought differently than I, and I liked the way that they approached the world. So when I got out of undergrad in Boston in 2002, I got a scholarship from Rotary Club to go study my master's anywhere I wanted in the world. And I chose Chile, and I chose University of Chile, and I moved down there for 15 years and started a business, which I just recently sold. And I met the love of my life, and she talked me into having a beautiful son that I was reluctant to. And now I'm glad that I was wrong and lost that battle and somehow got back to Kansas to be closer to my parents and live inside of a zoo.
And I'll ask you sort of the tough question for the day, and you don't have to answer this if this is too complicated or too hard a question, Peter. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready. I have a feeling that I know what it's going to be.
I don't know. We're going to find out. Who is a nicer person, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith or Paul McCartney, originally from the Beatles? Who's more of a pleasure to be around?
I didn't have much interactions with Paul McCartney, a little bit more with Beyonce, but Steven Tyler's interaction is unforgettable. He walked into my office after renting a bicycle from my travel company. And when he walked in, our head receptionist was such a big fan of him. She had already met him in person 3 or 4 times. And for some reason, our bicycle mechanic inside the office was walking around the office with a Sharpie. And he took his shirt off immediately in front of Steven Tyler and passed him the Sharpie and asked him to sign his chest. So Steven Tyler is memorable in my life, but the mechanic who asked him to sign his chest will never be forgotten.
That's literally an amazing story and fantastic. What are you most focused on and excited about besides the docu-series? What else are you excited about? And talk a bit about you're a fractional chief marketing officer. You're a fascinating person. I've read a little bit about you. Talk about what's exciting in the marketing world. When you look at people building businesses, a couple thoughts or pieces of advice that you would give to people.
Well, I'll answer what I'm excited about and then some advice. What I'm excited about right now is a book that I'm about to publish. It is about helping interns become A players. So the tentative title right now is From Intern to A Player, CEO's Playbook for Scaling Top Talent Remotely. And that kind of leads into what I'm passionate about from a marketing point of view, is that I think that there's so much global talent right now of people to help those with marketers and younger generation. I spent the last 2 years when I worked in a electronic healthcare records company, traveling from state to state in conventions and teaching people how to empower the younger generation of Gen Zs and millennials and quit complaining about their work ethic, rather empower them and train them into being A players. That's something I'm passionate about because I think companies need it, CEOs need it, and I think it can revolutionize your culture. And I always say that there's only two things that I'm particularly great at. One is my currency is vulnerability, and secondly is training and empowering younger talent. And those two things work together, and that's what I'm passionate about right now. And it'll help anyone who needs to grow their revenue from a marketing point of view.
No, one of the things that people might not recognize that my favorite show is a show I used to watch in Chile called Aquí te las traigo Peter. Can you tell the audience about that show?
That is good pronunciation. Have you really been to Chile and have you seen it?
I have not. I have not. You're calling me out on it. If Peter, this is my show, you're not allowed to do that. No, I'm totally kidding. Yes, obviously I've not. But tell us about hosting that show, your show. Tell us about that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so that was my introduction into television kind of as a talent. I had some experience on CNN beforehand in talking about US elections as a professor in Chile. And then I slowly got into public television in Chile. And that was the role where I was the host. And it is, as I mentioned before, and it's kind of Micro's dirty jobs. I go around and do everybody's job. I show up at their house at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. I meet their family, I get in their truck or ride their bicycle and go find out what makes them tick from a professional point of view. And then I would add in the element of Anthony Bourdain, where it's a little bit more sociological and a little bit more psychological, where I try to get to know the person as deeply as possible. And I created some amazing friendships out of this. And what's going to be interesting to you, Scott, without having watched it, is that the play on the name of the show, Aquí te les traigo Peter, is a Chilean phrase to mean I'm bringing my A game. And what's funny about that is in many Latin American countries, they think that a 6 foot tall, blue eyed, brown haired American might be culturally superior. They might think that I'm smarter, or they might think that I'm more talented or better at basketball or better business owner or whatever it is. And this show breaks that down and shows them not only do I not have an A game, but I can't do anything well. I can't weld. I can't build a house. I can't make homemade rope. I can't make shoes. So it is learning about how you can love Chilean culture, Latin American culture, through the eyes of a very, very deeply flawed, failed American gringo. and they get to laugh at me as I curiously try to learn other people's passions in life.
Thank you so much. There used to be a TV star in America. He was the star in one of the advertisements for one of the liquor brands that they used to say was the most interesting person in the world. And I think you probably rival that person with the experiences that you've had. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm spacing on who it is again. The person with the TV ads, but the most interesting person in the world. But you might be that.
Well, I appreciate the compliment. I have a lot of stories to share, mostly because I've been an unsettled human being trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up, Scott. So I've been in a midlife crisis since my early 20s, and I manifest that through creativity, not through alcohol or new girlfriends or new cars. And I feel blessed with the foundation that I was given, and that's all I have to say for myself.
Peter, I want to thank you for joining us today on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. It sure was a fascinating pleasure visiting with you. You're one of the most multifaceted people I ever get to talk to. Thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us today. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Scott.